All right, folks, we have an XRP reverse carry trade warning for you guys this Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. It's going to be a quick update, straight to the point, breaking down the situation at hand with President Trump's 48-hour warning set to expire here later today in less than about 9 hours after you guys see this update. The countdown is on. Oil prices already starting to move back up, and we'll be breaking down new statements from an ex-Bank of Japan board member who is warning that the Bank of Japan, not only will they have to raise rates, they might have to do it sooner than expected and raise them more than the market is anticipating, which can bring us back to that scary scenario of that reverse carry trade unwinding too quick where markets won't be able to handle it. And that's the concern and the warning that we're going to be talking about here in today's update, tying it back to XRP and how XRP is positioned along with the broader crypto market as well. So if you appreciate these updates, make sure you guys subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're going to keep it coming. Current events, financial markets, and how to take advantage of the greatest transfer of wealth in world history. Now, quick warning before we get into it, little heads up. You have until April 15th to fund your IRA for 2025. So if you haven't done it already, I wanted to make sure everybody has enough time to get it done. Our sponsor, iTrust Capital, linked up down below, ready to help you get it done with exposure to digital assets and precious metals. This is why we partnered up with them. When you use my link down below, you'll get a $100 funding bonus. But we're now looking at just over a week to go, the deadline to fund your IRA for 2025. So get it done. Linked up down below, $100 funding bonus with iTrust Capital. Right on into the data, though. U.S. strikes more than 50 military targets on Karg Island. This is being reported by the Wall Street Journal this morning. So the countdown is on. Strikes are already hitting Karg Island. It's going down. Iran is saying that there's currently no communications taking place between either side. President Trump is saying things are going great, but we're also ready to destroy an entire civilization. And that's basically a direct quote from President Trump. So the market is scared right now. We're watching as oil has shot up here on the fears that this is about to get hot. $116 per barrel is where we're at on the WTI crude oil measurement this morning. So this is what's happening. We're going to continue to monitor the situation, but in Iran right now, they are forming human chains across bridges and around power plants after the threat of U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran's civilian infrastructure. So, countdown is on. It's 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. on the West Coast. We'll see what President Trump decides. It could go either way. I've just topped off my margin account so I don't get liquidated on my XRP long that I'm in. I've also added fresh capital to my platform so that I'm ready to buy the dip as well too. So, already have orders placed, going to be placing more orders and covering myself to the downside. Because not only could some boots on the ground announcement, some big bombs getting dropped, the next escalation could bring in some new lows, but this also is going to exacerbate that carry trade unwinding, which we call the reverse carry trade over in Japan. And we have fresh statements coming out this morning from ex-Bank of Japan, CJ Adichie, says Japan may hike rates before July on rising inflation. Sees moves from 0.75% towards 1.25%. The neutral rate is what he says. Now, the expectation is that the Bank of Japan will be raising rates by 25 basis points from 0.75 to 1%, not going up to 1.25%. And he's saying and warning that they may have to do it before July. And the expectation right now is that this is going to come in June or July, not in April, which is the next Bank of Japan meeting. Now, he's warning that this is going to have to happen because inflation will be surging once again with oil prices rising from that Middle East conflict. So that choke point is the real pressure point for the Bank of Japan, where the oil, we can't get it at the prices we used to, starts to climb up aggressively once again here. And this causes the Bank of Japan to panic because they are, once again doing a good job battling inflation right now. And the inflation reading coming in here. Let's pull this up here. We got core CPI is down to 1.6%, and the core CPI, which excludes fresh food and energy, is at 2.5%. So the core CPI is a little bit above their 2% target, but their headline number is at 1.6. Now, we do see that their first initial reading for March inflation, because that was the February report, the March inflation headlines around 1.4%, with core at 1.7% and core at 2.3%. So they have a couple different measures, right? We have headline CPI and then core CPI. They have headline, which is at 1.4% for March, core, which excludes fresh food at 1.7%, and core, which excludes fresh food and energy at 2.3%. So this is the first reading for March. We'll see what the final numbers are for March, but this was when the war was just getting started, and we still had oil arriving in Japan at the rates, that were tolerable. So now into April, as this war's gone on for over a month, now we start to see the impact really hitting in, East Asia and other regions around the world, where the oil that was coming, that's already been paid for at those lower rates, it's been coming in, and that kept inflation down. But will that last, into the tail end of March as this continued and into the beginning of April here? There's no signs of slowing down, and then with continued escalation, this is when the fears of inflation coming back roaring becomes a concern for the Bank of Japan and central banks around the world, for that matter. And so this is an ex-BOJ board member, Adichie, who is saying that Japan may hike rates before July, and that they might have to do it up to 1.25%, or a 50 basis point hike instead of just a 25 basis point hike. The next Bank of Japan scheduled meeting is Monday, April 27th, a 2-day meeting. And then they also have a meeting in June and July as well, too. Now, like I said, the market is expecting a rate hike of 25 basis points between now and June or July. So that won't cause any sort of shock on this reverse carry trade unwinding. But if we get a panic move from the BOJ and they raise rates before that timeline and raise them higher than is expected, this is when you go back and look at August 2024, where you had a significant drop in the stock market, in the crypto markets, across the board, as the Bank of Japan kind of panicked, had to intervene a little bit, and was able to kind of put a Band-Aid on the dying out and wounding patient, but they didn't really solve the issue all the way. And everything had kind of calmed down until this conflict in the Middle East started back up. And then this is what's putting, these statements are starting to come back out, and the concerns are starting to arrive again as Japan has to deal with this energy crisis, which also takes it back to the inflation rising once again. And they can't have this with a country that's already been feeling the pains of interest rates rising at a pace that's faster than most can handle, and inflation that's been persistent, although below targets, persistent inflation that's compounded over the past 5 years, that you're feeling back here home in the United States as well too, or wherever you're tuning in from for our international audience, you're feeling it as well. These central banks can talk about inflation coming down below the targets, but it hasn't gone away. It's been persistent, and it compounds, so that aggregate inflation, that's what's bleeding out the average person, the poor middle-class worker who can't keep up even with a little bit of a raise here or there. It's not enough to keep up with inflation. This gets scary because when this carry trade starts to unwind, we're talking about hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars of exposure through this trade mechanism. This brings us to, where is XRP positioned in all of this? Is XRP positioned to save the day? I'm not one that thinks that XRP is going to be the one and only solution to save the day. What I have been suggesting is that these central banks and governments around the world, they need their national currencies tokenized ASAP, and they need to get adoption and demand for these stable coins to soak up the demand that's been falling off for their treasuries and the bonds that are going up right now in Japan, that are going up right now in the United States. President Trump and Scott Bessent battling that 10-year up at 4.5, pushing towards 5%. And in Japan, that, 10, 20, 40 year, all at levels that we haven't seen since the late 90s. So all of these central banks have the same issue. Stablecoins is the answer. And this is where XRP is perfectly positioned, because I think that the XRP ledger becomes a hub, one of the best sources of liquidity. And that is where it will be seen as a solution for these countries that are trying to get adoption for their national currency in a stablecoin form that's backed by those short-term T-bills that need to be soaked up. Now, it just so happens that SBI, Ripple Asia, just completed its token issuance platform on the XRP ledger. A huge shout out to Bank XRP for pulling this one up. Now, if you look, this system enables token issuance and management on the blockchain by connecting to existing applications and websites via API. Businesses can introduce token functionality while maintaining their existing services and customer touchpoints, and users can naturally own and use digital assets without disrupting their previous service experience. Furthermore, this system is built on the public blockchain XRP ledger, combined with our proprietary wallet control technology, while taking into account compliance with various financial regulatory requirements for third-party prepaid payment instruments. As of March 26, 2026, our company has completed registration as a third-party prepaid payment instrument issuer. This will enable us to use this system to issue tokenized third-party prepaid payment instruments. This system is intended for use cases that link consumer behavior with digital incentives in specific economic zones, such as tourist destinations. We will continue to develop new payment and incentive mechanisms that create value in the real economy, such as cost benefits and service scalability, while integrating with our existing service infrastructure. So you might be saying, well, Zach, this is just, some deal that's talking about servicing small economic zones, tourist zones, etc. In my opinion, this is the start of something much bigger. And I've actually looked, and we've mentioned SBI in the past as how they could be a chosen private issuer of a yen stablecoin that would help solve the issue that I'm addressing in today's update, right? Where you get these third-party issuers, not just the central bank issuing central bank money, but the third-party issuers also issuing tokenized stablecoins and other real-world assets that are denominated in that nation's currency to help soak up demand for treasuries. And SBI, I think, is perfectly positioned, and we know how much they've been leaning in on the XRP ledger with this kind of token issuance platform being done on the XRP ledger. And so this might not seem like the end-all be-all solution. I'm not saying that it is, but I just find it interesting that SBI is now positioning themselves with this token issuance platform on the XRP ledger at a very convenient time, we could say. Now, this goes much further though, and I think that the XRP ledger is not only going to get a tokenized yen, it's already getting ROUSD, a US dollar derivative, and you've already seen many other governments and central banks working with Ripple on issuing their stablecoin on the XRP ledger as well. The reason why XRP's positioned so perfectly is because it's one of the best sources of liquidity in the world. And that's why a country will want their stablecoin, their CBDC, on the XRP ledger. And I'm not one to say that XRP is going to be the only solution. I just think that it's one of the best positioned solutions when you look across all of the blockchains. A lot of these, companies, projects, stablecoin issuers like Tether, Circle, they're issued on multiple chains, including Ripple, ROUSD. It's issued on Ethereum and the XRP ledger. But I believe that the XRP ledger is uniquely positioned, and you have partners of Ripple like SBI that have been investing in the ecosystem. They've invested in Evernorth, and now they're building out their own platform for, token issuance platform. And this could be anything, not just stablecoins, but other, tokenized assets as well. Which brings me to the private credit crisis. Sasha Hodder right here. BlackRock has suddenly halted investor withdrawals in its $26 billion corporate lending fund due to liquidity constraints. What about, private equity, private credit? Some of these funds could be issued on blockchains as well. And I think that the XRP ledger is uniquely positioned for that use case as well. And so, all of this to say, we have to watch closely here to see what happens. Nobody knows what's going to happen over the next 10 hours with President Trump in the Middle East, but we'll be watching it closely because the ripple effects could be felt across the world. In particular, when you look at this Japan carry trade unwinding, they haven't had to panic yet, but that moment could be coming soon over the next few months. And with it, could bring in the final lows of this bear market, which I will be buying the heck out of. And I will be buying assets like XRP for the reasons that I've laid out in this episode here today. It is perfectly positioned to be a platform for tokenized real world assets, for stablecoins and central bank digital currencies. And as we highlighted in today's update, this is the real pain point of the Treasury, of the Federal Reserve, and President Trump battling those interest rates, those yields rising against the, an agenda to bring those rates back down, an agenda to unwind that carry trade gradually in Japan. It can't be done if we get skyrocketing oil. This conflict continues. The energy crisis gets worse. Panic is going to arrive. That's going to unwind things more quickly, which I actually would be in favor of at this point. Let's just get it done, rip the Band-Aid off. If companies need to fail, if governments or central banks need to fail, if currencies need to fail, let's rip the Band-Aid off and get it done, because we have the solution for the other side of this situation, which is permissionless open source blockchains like XRP. And I think that the XRP ledger is positioned better than most. It's not the only and end all be all, but I think that it is one of the best options that we have, along with central banks and governments around the world who clearly have a problem. What's going to be their chosen solution? I think that XRP is going to get a big piece of that pie, and I've positioned myself accordingly. So with that being said, that is the update on the reverse carry trade unwinding right now. It's all determined based off of what we see happening here in the Middle East. Any other further spikes in oil could lead to some panic, and that's when we start to get that carry trade unwinding rapidly and potentially violently for markets. So be prepared for downside action in the short term. On the other side, I've outlined in my update yesterday, in previous updates over the past few weeks, about how the money printers are already starting, government's getting ready for stimulus, government's getting ready to inject liquidity. So it's going to be bumpy. Ain't nothing about this going to be smooth sailing. But on the other side of this, it's a tremendous opportunity to lean into the volatility, ride out the storm. And then on the other side of this, we have asset appreciation that's going to come in again, and it's going to happen quicker than most people are expecting. And a lot of people are going to get left behind in that. I want to make sure that our community is not left behind and that we're ready to take advantage of this transfer of wealth. So if you appreciate this breakdown, please help us out by liking this video, sharing this content out far and wide with friends, family, colleagues that need to get aware of the situation at hand and how to prepare themselves accordingly. Not going to tell you what to do with financial advice, but I'm just going to explain what I'm doing in an effort of transparency to keep it real with you guys and to keep on shooting it straight. Everything else is at my website, zachrector.com. Greatly appreciate your support. If you could smack it on the way out, we'd love that. Thank you and God bless. I am your host, Zach Rector. I really appreciate all of the love and support. If you want to support the channel, just remember that you can start by smashing that thumbs up for me, sharing this content far and wide, and everything else is at my website.